The way I see genre applying to what I've been doing, looking at 19th century scientific texts, is understanding which discipline in science is producing a certain text. And so I'm looking at experimental reports from physiologists, and it's a very distinct way of writing, and it's also quite a new way of writing, as in the 19th century physiology and physiologists are a burgeoning discipline. And so they're kind of it's this really unique style of writing, which is really, really different to reading, say, a chemist's work or a physicist's work or a sexologist's work. And I think that I just see it as being a very important thing to keep in mind as I'm reading a text, knowing exactly what type of document someone is trying to produce. Because at least I'm working with physiologists, they were kind of fighting for independence, I guess, in a way, from people who were dealing with anatomy or chemistry or physics, and so they have almost developed this distinct style of writing through their lab reports and through their publications, which is trying to incorporate different things from other texts as well. So in that sense, it becomes confusing. But when you understand that they're trying to create something new, you can see the sort of pathway they're carving out for themselves. And I think if you read that through a different lens, the meaning would become a bit distorted. And it's important to understand the context of the form in which they're writing.
Who this is meant for, what its purpose is, and I think that tells us a lot. That's kind of the first thing you want to look at when you look at a primary source is who's this written by, and why are they writing it? I think they're the first questions before you delve off into anything more interesting. I've always been interested in genres that hold some kind of authority. So I guess what I've always been interested in my research is how we have these kind of authority structures and how that compares to how ordinary people, for want of a better term, experience their lives, and that kind of conflict between what an authority might be telling you to do or feel or believe or say, and how ordinary people might then interpret this or experience it.
Talking about the primary sources I look at, I'm often reading anthropological texts, but I'm also often looking at missionary texts as well, which are themselves a completely different genre. And so the way in which perhaps the same Indigenous group or island group from the South Pacific is represented in each type of literature can be quite different according to their own goals and aims and emphasis in those texts. I don't know that I necessarily dwell on it too much, except just to be aware of the goals and aims of the different authors in what they're trying to achieve. There are certain genres, I think, within academia. If you can master them, you can go a long way. So if you can master the journal, the traditional journal article or the traditional monograph, you can probably have a reasonable, successful career. Whether one should go further than that, probably yes. I think it is good to be aware of the different contexts in which you're writing, and obviously for whom you're writing as well. And obviously in the past 50 years or so, scholars have not necessarily been so good at recognising or even imagining an audience when they're writing. And I do think that process of imagining who you're writing for does and should change how you write.
There's lots of different definitions of genre. I talk about genre in terms of popular fiction, but of course you can expand that into popular narrative in general, so film, TV, video games, that kind of thing. We all know what a fantasy novel looks like, what a fantasy video game looks like, what a fantasy movie looks like. So that's the kind of genre that I'm interested in, those kind of divisions of storytelling. And I think the biggest misunderstanding about genres is that they're somehow static, unchanging, able to be defined, and that somehow the rules of the genre, or the formula, which everyone always wants to talk about, what's the formula for that genre, are set in stone somewhere, probably by some evil, grabby hands publishing executive, and that's what you have to do if you want to be published, is you have to subscribe to that genre and do exactly that. But again, these things, genres are formed collaboratively, publicly, with community, industry and creators. That's how it works. You're asking the wrong question of genre if you're asking things like, why are people drawn to certain genres? Or I think you're much better off asking, how is this genre formed? What processes have gone into it? What collaborations, explicit and implicit, are involved in bringing this genre into life? And how then is it sustained beyond that?
It's crucial to critically evaluating any piece of writing from the past to keep in mind for whom it was written and why. And to keep in mind that it was deliberately written, more often than not, it was deliberately written in order to be read by others.
I think genre is really foundational, but that's also because I'm a literary critic, right? You know, it's one of our core skills is what kind of text is this? How does the form of this text influence the way it makes meaning, or the way it causes an effect, or the way it influences an audience? So yes, I think it's really important, and I think it's interesting in academic work because we get trained often, we read lots of different genres, but we produce only one kind traditionally. We produce the essay, and that's what we train our students in traditionally. And I think increasingly in academia, we're thinking about other forms of training and different genres that people are going to need. And I think both of those are actually really important. I think it's really important to know how to write an essay that's referenced, that's persuasive, that's backed up by evidence, that is aware of the scholarly conversations it's joining. Because if you're asked as a beginning person, you know, graduate employee in the public service to write a position paper about a particular policy document, your essay will only be 1 page or 2 pages, but it will have to have all of those same features. So it's not like the essay is a non-transferable skill, it's a highly transferable skill. But I think also that when we think about the genres of writing and expression that people might be using both to communicate both inside the university and then after university, we need to be thinking about making sure our students have the skills in those other genres as well. That process of learning a language, learning a genre language, and then learning how to bend and break it, I think is critical to both understanding where your training is coming from, but then knowing what else you might be able to do with that training.
One of the things that students can learn when they learn to read genre and learn to read language games are constructive and useful forms of disrespect, you know, and that's not rudeness, that's not arrogance, you know, just saying, you know, I don't respect that, there's nothing about that that deserves my respect, I know why you're trying to get me to do that, I might even do it, but, you know, you're not going to get respect from me for it. I think we should be quite stinting with respect, it's overdone.